This is a ManeHustle Media podcast.
Hi, and welcome to Milton Mixed, the podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your host, Sharmane, aka Mixed Girl Mane, and I'm laughing because this is the, 12th time I've attempted to record my intro today, and I am just... Okay, so when you are an independent podcaster who podcasts from a desk in your living room of your tiny LA apartment, you have to put up with the sounds of the other apartment. I have changed my microphones so that they weren't picking up actual conversations in other apartments, as was my first microphone, or just like the life buzzing around me type of thing. So I finally have a mic that I'm comfortable with and seems to do pretty good on audio and everything like that. But it never fails any time of day that I attempt to either record my intros or my promos or even sometimes my interviews. My next door neighbors or my above neighbors, I can't tell, take a shower. I don't know why. It can be because there's times I record at 3 a.m., 2 a.m. because I'm up, or like right now I started at 11 a.m. It is now 12:02 p.m. of the same day. I think, like I said, this is my 11th or 12th attempt at doing my thing. Every time I've stopped and allowed it to get silent again, they've turned the shower back on. So I don't know what's going on over there, but the shower turns on. Over the last 2 months that I've been recording, 2-3 months I've been recording at this point, the shower cuts on every single time. It's amazing. And also what you're hearing right now is someone is hammering a picture or something. That just started. So I've gone this whole hour just complaining about the sink. Now I got this person hammering something. So anyways, little control freak moment for Sharmane, available to all my listeners. But at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and let it happen and just take a deep breath and understand that this is the life of an independent podcaster that does shit from home. Mark Maron does it, and now he makes a whole bunch of money, and he does it in his garage. So if it's good enough for him and he can deal with background noise, then it's got to be good enough for me. And I can deal with it too. I will keep telling myself that I can deal with it. All right, moving on. So last week we introduced the Patreon page, which allows for people to sponsor independent podcasts like mine. Our website is www.patreon.com/militantlymixed, and that is patreon.com. Even I sponsor a couple of podcasts that I really like or listen to on a regular basis on there. You can sponsor our show at as low as $1 a month to as high as you wish. There's different reward levels for your sponsorship, anything from just a tip jar. You just want to help keep us going and help us grow and develop, to getting shout outs on social media or shout outs on the on the actual show itself, the recording. There's also, we have mini pins, we have tote bags coming eventually. We also have t-shirts in the process. So depending on the level that you wish to sponsor, if you stick around with us for a couple months, those rewards will start to hit. And also, once we start getting more sponsors, we will be able to afford the time and the ability to put on extra content on the Patreon page. This extra content will be exclusive to sponsors. So if you want to know more about us and the show, or the people that we talk to on the show, that's where you will get that extra information. In some cases, I may cut down an interview for time and, maybe shorten a section to be more concise, but we actually rambled on about it back and forth for a while. Those types of things I will be adding to Patreon. So like I said, it's not quite up yet. It will start to get up soon. And as we get more sponsors, it will also increase in more content will go up there as we get more sponsors. Your sponsorship will help us improve our equipment. Maybe I can get some sound blankets so that you won't hear the people hammering or showering next door. It'll also, continue to help us with hosting our podcast and spreading the word so that we get more people. So independent podcasts really survive not just on the amount of people that download our episodes, but on the independent sponsors of our shows. There's a few podcasts that I've listened to for a long time that are now dead podcasts because they didn't, they weren't able to maintain their hosting fees and things like that without sponsorship. So we do hope that you are enjoying the show and that you're getting a lot out of it. And if you are, if you can give $1 a month here and there, or if or do a one-time donation, that would be great. We don't quite have the one-time donation button available yet. That is actually coming probably in mid-August. We're finalizing the website, and when that is available, it will be up on there, and you'll be able to donate as a one-time only thing. If you do want to be a sponsor of the show, though, Patreon is the place to go. And again, as low as $1 a month to as high as you wish. We did get our first sponsor last week, who is actually a friend of mine from my community college days when I used to go to Sierra College in Rockland, California in the late 90s. We actually haven't seen each other probably since my wedding, honestly, which was in 2005, I think is when I got married. So, but we've stayed in contact through social media, and they didn't ask to be named, so I'm not naming them, but I know that they're listening, or now I know that they're listening, and I want, to thank them for sponsoring the show. It means a lot, especially after not having seen you in so many years. So thank you for listening, and I appreciate you and love you, and thank you. All right. There are a few other announcements that I want to make, but we're not quite ready yet, and I don't want to expose it before we're ready, but we have a couple things coming down the pipe that I'm really excited about, and some of the other participants that have been on the show already or are coming on the show are involved in this new thing that I'm excited about. So stay tuned. That we'll start to talk about it as it forms a little bit more, but it's going to be good, and I'll be excited to share that with you. Now to the episode. We are on episode 5, and things have changed so much in just the 5 weeks that the show has been on. So a little bit of background for those of you that might not quite be aware. I actually started recording my interviews back in May of 2018, but we didn't actually launch the show until July. So a lot of the interviews that you've heard so far have been from the earlier days of recording. Some of them are from more recent recordings, and so you may notice a difference in quality of the sound for some of the interviews, and in some cases, even my own interview skills have gotten a little bit better once I started piecing together more of what I wanted out of the show. They'll still be, for the next month or so, you'll still get some episodes that are a little bit more interview, question answer style, because that was what I was originally thinking was the way to make this happen. But really what I wanted out of this podcast was to be more conversational. I have gone away from the standard question answer types of conversations. I only sort of ask questions if they've said something that makes me want a little bit more information. So this is actually one of the interviews that I did on the cusp of that switch from the standard question answer interview to more of a conversation. I actually probably am listening more in this discussion than in some of my more recent interviews, because this person in particular, his story is pretty captivating, and I felt like it was better told by him than really inserted by me inserting things. There was a few times I asked questions, but our guest this week is Milton Washington. He is of Black and Korean ethnic heritage. He was born in Korea, the product of I guess we would say a Korean prostitute to the military base, but I think it's a lot more complicated than just that, given the time period that Milton was born and the landscape of Korea while there was the American occupation. Well, you'll hear it in the interview. It's a little bit more complicated than to just reduce it to his mother being a Korean prostitute. His father was a Black member of military personnel, but he does not know his biological father. And he was eventually adopted by a Black American family, military family, that brought him to the U.S. when he was around 8 to 10 years old. There's a question about his age too, because of the nature of how he was born, and so he was, from that point on, raised as an American kid with a Black family. He and another Black and Korean adopted brother were brought on by this family, and he's got a really interesting story, something unlike anything that I've experienced. But in the course of this podcast, he was the first Black Asian person that I connected with, and I have so little interaction with other Black Asians, and in particular Black Japanese Japanese like myself, that when I first met Milton, I was pretty like, oh my gosh, I was excited. It doesn't happen very often. There's a huge stigma about Black Asians. The way that we are treated in comparison to white Asian mixes is quite a lot different. Colorism is a big problem in the Asian community. It's in all communities, I think I've said a million times, but with Asians, being dark is not ideal. So if you mix with Black, you're fucking up. What are you doing? And we both share sort of that baggage of how our Blackness messes with our Asianness. And he's got an incredible story. I'll flip it over to him and he will introduce himself and start telling his story. But before we do that, there's a few things that he is working on right now that I would like to promote. He does talk about it a little bit in the interview, but again, that interview was done a few months ago, so just to freshen it up and update it, we'll put some stuff on our Instagram and our Twitter and our Facebook about a photography exhibit project that he's working on right now. You can also find, he's also working on a memoir about his experience called Slickyboy, which he talks a little bit about what Slickyboy means and everything in the episode. But you can go to facebook.com/Slickyboy Memoir, and that's SLICKY Slicky Boy Memoir. He also has a Slickyboy Studios Facebook page for his business, which is a sort of business consulting company for small businesses. He's on Instagram, and I think he says he's on Twitter, but he doesn't really like Twitter that much, as Slickyboy Memoir and Slickyboy Studios. So please check out his art. He has an exhibit from a couple months ago, which was sort of like an Afro neon fashion design thing. We've got another exhibit coming up, which like I said, I'll reference on Instagram. So please check out our social media over the next couple days to see that. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at militantlymixed.com. We are also on Facebook, www.facebook.com/militantlymixed. And again, don't forget our Patreon, www.patreon.com/militantlymixed. So without further ado, here is my discussion with Milton Washington. So I'll go ahead and let you have a chance to introduce yourself a little bit, and then we can kind of go into book and your upbringing and everything that you want to talk about.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Milton Washington. It used to be Pak Miltana in South Korea. I am Black and Korean. My mother was Korean. Father was Black, I'm assuming. Never met him, but I was told about him. And I was born somewhere in South Korea, probably late 60s. And it was my mother and I living in South Korea. First kind of out in the village, then in a town called Tongnucheon when I was about 6 for a hot minute. And then living in a town called Bupyeong, which is what's also known as a camp town, because that's also where a large U.S. military installation was. And then at around the age of 8, I got adopted, put in an orphanage for a couple of weeks, and I basically kind of stole my way into the car and the lives and the family of the Washingtons, a Black military family, originally from Texas, who was serving a tour in South Korea, one of several tours that they served in South Korea with their entire family, who are now, kind of my siblings. So I'm writing a book about all this called Slickyboy, which is a memoir, and it's really about the identity. It's about U.S. militarism and the effects of all that. It's about multiculturalism. It's about me trying to get my hands and mind around what it meant to be Black before I even knew what Black was. And it's me trying to kind of find my way after adoption and trying to kind of find my tribes. But then ultimately, kind of settling on the idea that, I caught a lot of hell in South Korea for being different and, with this dream of kind of fitting in once I got to the States. But then when I got to the States, I was still different. But fortunately for me, I was a kid who was very self-aware, and I was a kid who was extremely determined to kind of prove to the world that they were wrong about me. And I did indeed have a lot of value. And that kind of idea of, crafting, my expertise and kind of all things that was, being a kid, kind of translated into me becoming very good at certain things in high school, such as football and around social issues, and kind of how I was having a mouthpiece and being able to kind of defend myself verbally and physically. And fortunately for me, I was a kid that was good enough and big enough to go play Division I football. So, I ended up having, even though I was going through some struggles, I ended up having some really, really good aspects or really good attributes that gave me almost kind of a privileged life in many ways. So, it's about kind of owning all that and arriving at a conclusion that, when being different was such a liability back then, now, I think it's probably my greatest asset, but also taking the good and the bad along with that, which is, there are plenty of times that, throughout the course of a day or a week or month, in which I go, being different is, can be extremely lonely, but understanding, kind of what my purpose in life is, not everybody is dealt the same hand, but I said that I'm going to go ahead and, I'm going to fully understand what my hand is, and I'm going to own that hand, and I'm going to do what I got to do to make a positive difference in this life.
Right.
So that's kind of what my whole story is about.
So one of the things you said just now that was kind of interesting, you said I was born in South Korea sometime around the late 60s. Do you don't have established paperwork? You don't quite know exactly how old you are? Is that true?
I don't, because if you're born, mixed race during that time in South Korea doesn't recognize you as a citizen. Oh. So technically, I have never been a citizen of South Korea, even though for the first 8 years of my life, that's all I knew. Because I was born there. That was my language. That was my culture. I didn't know anything about anything else except for this kind of idea of America which is golden cities that floated in the clouds with flying cars.
Right.
So after I got adopted, my family had to kind of establish my age and my birthday. And, so I got naturalized. And once I started school, I was around 8 years old. They didn't want me to miss a whole lot of school, but they essentially kind of wound my clock back from what they thought my real age was to 2 years. And they did the same thing for the other kid, Joseph, that got adopted, because they didn't want us missing a whole lot of school. And so officially, my birthday is September 1970. But, there's some pretty good evidence out there that says I was born around 68.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't have I guess I do understand that sort of like you're not a citizen, because Japan does that as well. Even when foreign workers come in, if they want to be established as citizens, they have to relinquish their Korean citizenship, but also relinquish their Korean name, and they have to take on a Japanese name to be allowed to even just work in the country, not even necessarily become citizens.
Right.
So it's crazy. That's sort of a Asian thing across the board.
Yeah, it's Asian, but I suspect that there's probably other countries that kind of did the same thing. We don't have the same numbers to kind of aggregate all those data points, because Asia was heavily militarized by the U.S. Mm-hmm. So it's just a good large sampling of these types of stories. And I have to say that's kind of it's one of the things that I say about adoption in general, and people who have been in these situations like me. I keep telling folks, I'm like, you're not the only just because you were adopted, you're not the only person that's been through some severe trauma.
Right.
Severe trauma comes in all different forms and fashion. And I know some people that are extremely traumatized, and they got parents. Right. And to me, trauma is trauma. This is just our brand of trauma. And I say that to say that there are a lot of people in this world that are in some serious pain. And one of the things that I think that lessens that pain is when you know that you have, others. You're not in that boat by yourself.
Right. And we talked a little bit about this in sort of our pre-discussions too, about building that community and feeling like, probably certainly with being adopted, but being a mixed race person in mostly monoracial spaces, if you don't reflect the space that you're in, if you don't look like everybody else, you feel like a kind of orphan of your race. For me, I don't present as black as I grew up and feel. I identify more black than I do the other races that I am. And I had to code switch a bunch. If I'm in my Japanese grandma's household, I behave in a very Japanese manner. Deference to the older generations and things like that. There's a version of that on the black side, but it's slightly different. It's not like a hierarchical deference. It's just, different things like, how the grandmothers tend to be more important than the grandfathers, things like that.
Absolutely.
That sort of happens.
Culture matters.
Yeah, it does. And we built through Militantly Mixed and through these other channels that you and I both have had throughout our life, we're finding our community. We're trying to build the family that we don't really have, even though we don't all look alike.
Absolutely.
Going back to the Bupyeong Camp Town area, so it was a heavily U.S. military area. Is this where I know that you talk about this a little bit in your book about your mother? Is this was this a draw for poor Koreans that would kind of come to the area to service the military, the U.S. military, and that's sort of how your origin starts?
Well, the short answer is yes, with an asterisk. The term camp town is basically a Korean town that revolves around the U.S. military base, because the U.S. military base is a source of money, U.S. dollars. And, this is just a kind of a little factoid. After the Korean War, there was nearly 100 military bases throughout South Korea. Army, Navy, and Air Force, etc. Varying sizes. Yeah, South Korea wanted the protection of the U.S. military to defend the communist aggressions of not only North Korea, but, their backers, Russia and China. And, so they needed that protection. South Korea needed that protection from the U.S. military. But the other kind of part of that agenda around why South Korea kind of wanted the U.S. military there is because the U.S. military, coupled with the kind of the camp town prostitute, that operates within the red light districts right outside of the gates of these military bases, the camp town prostitute was the number one earner of the U.S. dollar. And South Korea, after 35 years of Japanese occupation, and then, the U.S. dropping the bomb on Japan and ending that occupation and kicking all the Japanese out of South Korea, they had to kind of shore up their financials, to support that country. So they had to get their economic infrastructure back in place. And this was basically the Korea's Marshall Plan, so they weren't just given a big sum of money like in Europe. So they had to earn it. And the number one earner of those U.S. dollars that were injected into the Korean economy was the Korean camp town prostitute. So with that, South Korea would kind of collaborate with the U.S. military, and they would kind of promote this work of, hey, come to the bars within these. They didn't call them red light districts, or also known as kichujans, but they would say, basically, you're a young woman, you don't have too many opportunities. Come here, and you can get these dollars hanging out with these U.S. soldiers, which ended up being a pretty attractive option to a lot of young girls around South Korea who really didn't have too many options after 35 years of occupation.
Right.
So the camp town was a place that would draw a lot of these girls to do this work. And, my mother, who was a mama-san or a boss, she was one of the girls, she was one of the women who managed these girls, so in chances are, I think, kind of like you said, I was probably a product of my mother doing this work, and that's how I kind of became into being, but I do know that, my first memories of me and my mother were out in the village away from the camp town. So, and it's just kind of like anything else. When you're in the game, you probably have kind of a love-hate relationship with that game, and you're in it and you're out, and you're in it and you're out. And so when, my early memories out in the village, completely away from the camp town, my mother was probably out. But then, we ended up getting kicked out of the village, and, probably with few options, she probably got back in the game because it was her best option.
Right. So that brings us sort of to SALT, which is not only a chapter in the Mixed Korean book, correctly, it's also something that's going to be in Slickyboy.
Exactly.
So this is a chapter I read like middle of the night because I was up and thinking about the podcast. And it really, I mean, it paints such a clear picture for sort of those early memories of you, and that some of the things that you were talking about in there, that waking up and being that fear is very similar to the kind of fear that I felt in terms of being Black in an Asian space when I was with my mom's side of the family. So in particular, my grandmother, we did have to hide that we were Black from the extended family. So my grandmother knew, but she didn't necessarily want us to tell the extended family. And so there was always this concern that I was going to drop Blackness in a space and have that kind of fear of my grandmother's disappointment or whatever, those eyes looking at me. And I felt like that was something that you kind of talked about in Salt. So do you want to share a little bit about that chapter and the significance that moment had in changing the direction of your life?
Well, I'd say that, kind of what the chapter is about is, first of all, I'm about 5 years old. And again, it's my mother and I, we're in the village, and I wake up in the morning and I've peed in my little bed on the floor. And being that I was a kid that was kind of subjected to kind of this extreme isolation, I guess I'm not surprised that, that's one of my kind of, most concrete memories.
Right.
I used to do it a lot. Not only is that memory concrete because of that isolation, but it's also it's the tradition. It's this Korean tradition that, even with some of the Koreans that I know, if they're exposed to this story, most of the Koreans that you'll meet here in the States are from Seoul, which is kind of, it's not country, but they may know of this tradition because they may have aunts and uncles that's told them about this tradition who's lived out in the country. Mm. Right. So, and this tradition involves, what you have to do is you have to take this what's called a key. And a key is a kind of it's, if you think about a really, really large basket woven plate, it's a tool to dehusk rice.
Okay.
And every family has one. And so what you have to do is you have to take that key. I mean, I guess in different villages you can use different, I guess they have, different traditions, different tools to do this. But you have to basically knock on everybody's door. And then you have to tell them that you peed the bed. This is who I am. This is who my mother is. And the reason I'm coming to your door because I peed the bed again. I'm a bad kid. And then usually the mother of the house kind of chastises you verbally, and then they go in, grab a handful of rock salt as you put your key up to your chest, kind of up against your chest, and then they throw a bunch of salt at you. And some of that salt, after it hits your face, it falls into the key, and you have to repeat that, to every neighbor. So then when you come back home, you have a, kind of a reddened face from the ridicule and the crying. And,
right.
But you also have a key full of this rock salt that's basically the kind of the most valuable thing in the village because, we didn't have currency in the village
right.
At the time. So, and it's valuable because salt is, so instrumental, in the village. You cook with it, you clean with it, you cure foods with it, preserve foods with it, etc. So then when I come back home, my mother has kind of cleaned up the house. And, when I say house, it's a, kind of basically a clay hut, thatched roof, because there's no cars, no electricity, anything like that. And then, she sprinkles some of the salt onto the floor. And the reason all this, and I didn't want to, I don't really want to give it away, but, the reason that all this happens is because that tradition dictates that the reason that the child keeps peeing in the bed is because that child is basically possessed with the spirit of incontinence.
Right.
And the salt is the cleaning agent. So, when the kid is going around knocking on the doors, you throw the salt on him because that's going to get rid of the spirit of incontinence from the child. And then the collection of the salt, that salt needs to be taken back home because the spirits of incontinence also are in the house. So the mother has to clean the house and sprinkle the salt to clean the house in that way. And kind of, within this chapter, it's, I'm a kid that I didn't really have a whole lot of margin of error to bring any unnecessary attention to myself or my mother because I was the only black black kid in the village. And then at the end of that chapter, there's a knock on the door and then a discussion with my mother and a couple of other women from the village. And basically they say the village elders have decided that I must go and my mother must go because I'm bringing too much shame onto this village because, villages from all around are saying, yeah, there's a black kid in that one village over there. Me and my mother are kicked out. And we're kicked out because, just simply because I was black and she had a black kid. And that's kind of the other part of this chapter. Not only did I catch hell, but and I was kind of defined basically outside of the norms of Korea and what is to be Korean. But my mother was also chastised for having me and also defined to be outside of the norms of what is to be Korean because clearly I'm evidence of her, kind of illicit engagement with, basically with the enemy. And then to be engaged with the black enemy is, that's some of the worst thing you can do.
What was the concept of blackness for the people in the village? I mean, it was American plus, right? So it's not just that they were the American soldiers, but there were these lesser in some kind of way. Did they understand the lesser of the black people just based solely off of skin color? Or were they lesser because they saw the other white Americans treating them separately or that they were segregated in some kind of way? Like, what was the concept to Koreans of blackness for you?
I think there's I think there's kind of a two-sided thing there. So first of all, chances are, because the village wasn't a camp town, chances are the villagers never had exposure to black people, because they didn't go into, it's a day's walk to go to Gupyeong, so, chances are they didn't do it. Right. So I think there's let me start with this. People need to know that when it comes to U.S. militarism in these other countries, when there are these U.S. military bases, part of the existence, with basically, white men running the military, there was this kind of covert subversion of black soldiers by the U.S. military. And some of that covert subversion was to propagate this notion that black soldiers, black people were less than the white soldiers and white people, right? It's basically, the racist leadership basically propagating their ideals. So, when they went to these countries, like I said, there were these kind of covert actions. They're in Japan. They go, hey, Japan, we know that, we're here to help you guys out. But when it comes to, how you guys treat us, first of all, the white guys are the good guys. The black guys, not so good guys. You got to keep an eye on them. Right. So there's that. Right.
Yeah.
But then I also think that there's a natural thing, and this may be kind of controversial to a lot of folks, but I've always said that when it comes to think about it, like all around the world, the darker you are, basically the worse you get treated.
Yeah.
All around the world, right?
Yeah, every culture's got their version of it.
Yeah, every culture's got they nigga, basically.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So to me, there's something, and you've seen the studies about young children that pick that pick the light doll versus the dark doll. But then I also think that there's a kind of a natural thing. There's a natural thing that informs how people react to darkness or blackness, and that natural thing, I'm just saying it's you're not afraid of the light outside. You're afraid of the darkness.
Right.
Right. It's easy for a little kid to make a fun at a black kid to be like, you look like shit because you look like my shit. Right. You know what I mean? So, I think there's some just kind of natural things that almost kind of makes it, there's a part of blackness that goes, it's kind of unlucky, that, we're brown. And some of the things naturally that people are adverse to, whether it's, something being soiled or, like I said, some shit, that's just unlucky, So in the world of words, if you're trying to make someone else feel bad, that could be a liability. That's an easy liability to attack.
Right.
Right. So I think, kind of going back to the question, I think that there is this kind of natural negative disposition that people may have to blackness. And then once you overlay that disposition with a narrative that almost confirms that natural disposition, it's almost kind of weaponized, and it can become extremely potent form of racism.
Right.
So the people out in the village probably, didn't know too much, but they knew that I was black, and they knew I was different.
And of course, you would be the one wetting the bed because you're the black kid in the village. You're the unusual. So it would make complete sense in confirming to them.
Even though a bunch of other kids was peeing in the bed too, that's hell. They didn't create the tradition around me.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how it goes. It's like, one black guy, gets locked up because they were in a fight, right? And but they're in a fight down on Bourbon Street, and 15 other white guys. But the thing that makes it to the news is the black guy,
right?
That got into the fight on Bourbon Street, not the 15 other white guys.
Yeah.
But that's just how racism works.
Yeah.
That's just how racism works. So yeah, I think that Koreans. What was the question exactly, Hannah? Because I ended up going on about something.
It was really about the concept of blackness that the village or the countryside Koreans would have had compared to city people who may have seen more often.
That's right. Yeah. And really, I think the village Koreans might have had a hint of some of that narrative, like I said, that was propagated by U.S. military, because, there must be some folks who, do make it to town and hear some things. And, because when the U.S. military comes into town, word gets out far and wide, right? So they get a taste of that narrative. But then, being a darker color than everybody else, it's I think there's just a natural aversion. To blackness.
In the book, you also mentioned something about your hair being curly. So now you shave your head and everything like that, but you're a big, imposing looking dude walking down the street. But as a kid, you mentioned being kind of stronger than everybody. Plus you had your curly hair, you had your darker skin. So there was a lot of things in terms of the village kids. There was no way you couldn't stand out, right? Compared to anybody else that was there.
I stood out all day, every day. It's like, you got a bunch of little kids. If you got a bunch of little white kids there, and then, you got the Hulk standing next to him, that motherfucker standing, I was that obvious.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess even translating that into once you come to the States, and if you're being aged back 2 years, you're already going to probably be a little bit bigger than the kids that are in your classrooms at the time too, and then you're physically imposing compared to them, just not only in age but in physical stature. You were always kind of a buff kid and everything like that too.
Yeah. When I got adopted, at the age of 8, basically what I looked like. First of all, I had massive legs. And my family used to call my legs tree trunk legs.
Do you have the Asian calves, or do you have more of a?
I do.
I got them too.
They're big calves. I wouldn't say they're typical Asian, like just kind of big and almost obnoxious.
Right.
But it's it is a mix of it's a mix of black and Asian. I remember as a football player once when I got my scholarship to go play college ball. I'm standing on the field and dudes are like, man, that's some big ass calves on that nigga, man. What's but they weren't regular big. They were like extra big. So because there were a couple of other dudes who had the regular big calves, which are kind of high and tight.
Right.
Which my calves were big, kind of going all the way down.
Yeah, my husband calls them my cankles because he says I don't actually have ankles. I go from knee to calf all the way down to feet. Exactly. So yeah, physically I was always this, kind of aesthetically was I kind of always big and looked extremely capable. But like I said, I was good enough. I was a good enough athlete to to play college ball. Right. So we go now. We're transitioning from the village elders have decided that, and I know with Japanese are the same, bad luck or evil spirits or somehow some kind of demon or something like that has stepped in, and now you're being you're being asked to leave the village so that they can kind of restore their safe haven, and you go from there to a suburb of Seoul?
Actually, I go there. From there, we go to a town called Dongdaecheon, and it's north of Seoul, closer to the DMZ. And my mother is probably actually from Dongdaecheon because while we were there, and by the way, it's also another camp town, and that's where Camp Casey. As a matter of fact, I think Camp Casey's still there, and I think to a degree it's still operational, even though most of the U.S. military in South Korea is in a town called Pyeontaek, which is Camp Humphreys. But we go there, and I remember my mother running around looking for work, and I was alone by myself for a good chunk of the days, and I'd kind of wander through the streets, and that's kind of when I got my first taste of. I'd go into stores and steal all kinds of shit. So that's kind of where I kind of honed that craft. But I say that my mother's probably from there because her parents lived up in the hills, up in the mountains of Dongdaecheon, because I met my grandparents, and it was kind of a standoff. It was a kind of a conflict between my mother and my parents that I'll never forget.
Right.
But I only lived there for about a year, and then.
So you got to know your grandparents over the course of that whole year?
I wouldn't say get to know them. It was I met them, and I met them, and to give you a little bit of context, I met them, and it was them telling my mother, basically if you get rid of the black boy, we can normalize our relationship with you. Otherwise, you're on your own.
Got it. So you were very aware of that even at that young age.
Yeah. And not only that, but I think it's I even at that young age, I knew something was up with that dinner that it was because it was my grandparents inviting my mother and I up for dinner, and it was a conversation. But it was the feeling that I had, even though I didn't really know what they were talking about per se. The feeling that I had, like I said, I was a very self-aware kid the whole time.
Right.
But then, I got adopted with that other black kid, Joseph. And when I told him that story of meeting my grandparents, he had the same exact story. But his story, his version didn't go as far as mine, because when he got out of the taxi cab with his mother as it drove up the mountain, just like me and my mother did, and his mother knocked on this big brass knocker to get inside. His grandmother opened the door, looked at his mother and him, and then shut the door. And him and his mother just got back into the cab and left. Opposed to my grandmother led us in, and we actually had dinner, and they had that discussion. So that chapter, the Dongdaecheon chapter, is written, from my personal kind of emotional memories, along with Joseph's memories, kind of, what he did, but also with my understanding of how deep, how the culture regards the fact that my mother has been with black soldiers and has a black child. Right. It goes deep. Right. It goes so deep that their, families are willing to cut you off for that reason. And I think that's a very important thing that people need to know, how basically how deep this stuff is. Right.
Yeah, because we have it too. I mean, my thing is that my mom was also 14 when she was pregnant. My dad was 16. So by the time I was born, they were 15 and 17. So it's already bad enough she's a teenager pregnant. But then my white grandfather, is driving down the street. He sees my mom, kissing a black boy on the street corner or something like that, coming home, I think is the story that I've heard. And that was the shock. Oh, it's not only that she's pregnant, which is already a disgrace to our honor. Now you're going to also throw in that the father is black. And they didn't know if he was half black or full black or whatever. They just saw the afro.
They knew he was dark.
They knew he was dark, and they saw the afro. Yeah. So she was initially kicked out of the family. The funny thing is sometimes the child is the reason why they come back together. So my grandmother drops my youngest aunt off to come and see me. She was 13 at the time, and they saw that I turned out pale. I was nice and yellow. So then they put a hat on me and made my grandma laugh. And so even now to this day, if I throw a hat on, that's sort of a bonding thing between me and my grandmother. She loves to see me in hats. But if I had come out even a little bit darker, forget about it. We would never have been in that family again. And it took, I mean, she's asked me about being black one time organically, but you could tell she wasn't very comfortable with the question. And beyond that, it was just anytime we interacted where, you know, people see, you've seen my face, people see my face, and usually a black person will be like, oh, you're black, or your family, or are you black? You look black, something like that. And if I'm with my grandma, she'll be like, why did they ask you if you were black? And I was like, because they can tell. Why can they tell?
Right.
Because it's in my features. Well, can everybody tell? No, only black people can tell.
Right.
You know, that whole thing.
Right. So don't worry, Grandma. I'm not going to blow up your spot.
Right. You know, it's like, I mean, you know, unless a black person walks up to me and says you're black, you know, they're not going to know.
Right. Yeah. So we lived in Dongjusan for a year, and then after that we moved to the town of Pupyeong, which is where Camp Marquis was.
Oh, okay. And so you said that there were times where she would sort of park you in orphanages while she, I guess, sort of survived and you know, probably saved or something like that. And then there was just one time in particular that you realized that you weren't being parked in the same type of space. Is that right?
This is a really, really complicated thing, or it's a very nuanced thing. So put it this way. Let me see. How do I tell this exactly? Try to keep it kind of succinct. Okay. So this thing is it's deep. I mean, that's why I'm kind of hesitating. Normally, I don't really hesitate much, but it's deep because this issue is something that I cover in a chapter called Prostitution Protocol. Prostitution Protocol is I learned this from my adoptive father, because he was an officer at Yongsan when they adopted me. Mm-hmm. Yongsan was the largest military base in Korea. That's the one in Seoul. America has just given that land back to Korea. Mm. So the Prostitution Protocol were these kind of unwritten or protocols that kind of governed the sex trade between South Korea and the U.S. military. Okay. You know, that's why they're unwritten. And at a high level, I'm gonna say that. So one of the things that if you are a prostitute in a camp town, one of the first things that you have to do is you have to establish the type of soldier that you're going to serve. Are they going to be the black soldiers, or are they going to be the white soldiers? Now, the U.S. military got desegregated in 1948. That desegregation got implemented during the Korean War, but even well into the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and even some in the 80s, black and white soldiers had to play separately. So when they walked off the base and went to the red light district, they had to go to either all black club or all white club.
Oh, okay.
And those prostitutes that served those soldiers, they had to stay on their side of the line, right? So I remember when my mother and I moved from Dongdaecheon and moved to Bupyeong, I remember my mother physically transforming. You know, from her straight hair, she started to have this afro-ish. And not only that, but I also remember that her girls that she used to run, like I said, she was a boss. She used to have meetings in our apartment. Her girls kind of started to look more like her. They didn't look like kind of traditional Korean women. And that not only did they look different, but they sounded like, you know, when I first saw black soldiers and really kind of connected to them and identified with them, one of the things that I noticed about them was, you know, to us Korean kids, when black soldiers spoke, it sounded like they were singing. You know, because of the rhythmic ways that we talk. Right. And there was a particular little noise that all of us would kind of mimic and replicate to kind of mimic their voices. Right. And my mother and her girls started to sound like them.
So even with their Korean language, they would try to mimic the cadence?
Yeah, but you know, pretty much all of these girls were, you know, they were basically fluent in English because they served American soldiers. So what I'm saying is they started to look like the women. These Korean prostitutes who served black soldiers, I didn't know it at the time, but started to look like black women and started to sound like black women. Because they were serving the black soldiers. Right. And remember, all this is about prostitution protocol.
Right.
The U.S. military said that, so if you're this prostitute, you had to establish which soldier you're going to serve. And then when you serve on that side of the line, you have to stay on that side of the line.
Right.
And you had to work in, these brothels for only black soldiers and brothels for only white soldiers. And even when you're walking about the streets, any soldier that comes up to you, they need to know without any words they need to know who you serve. So the Korean prostitutes that serve the white soldiers, sometimes these girls would walk around in cowboy hats. Well, so the question is why, and the answer is because the racist U.S. military said that in order to keep soldiers at the kind of ready and kind of at the peak of readiness, ready to fight at any given moment, one of the things that kind of factors into readiness is not only training and exercise and all that kind of stuff, but also they need to be sexually satisfied. You can't have a bunch of dudes all pent up,
Right.
So they need to be sexually satisfied. So military brass feels like they have to create these camp towns. These red light districts. So part of that readiness is you need these soldiers to be healthy. One of the things that goes against them being healthy is STDs. And the U.S. military said that it's the black soldiers that are primarily responsible for spreading STDs.
Wow.
So to keep them separate, so we're going to keep them separate, and we're going to put the onus on the prostitutes to stay healthy. So every prostitute that worked in a camp town in a red light district had to carry what they call a VD card. It's identification that says that they have had their weekly checkup. And if you didn't have that VD card, you're going to get arrested. Or if there were some soldiers that said, hey, Bob and Tom and Larry, who patrons this bar, they all got VD now. So now the Korean police will raid that bar. And then once they raid them, arrest the girls, they would put the girls into these lockups on the U.S. military base called monkey houses.
Oh, my gosh.
And they would force them therapies for STDs. And I know that firsthand because I remember seeing my mother getting arrested, and she told me, I'm going to be back in 2 weeks. Stay at home, eat downstairs at her homegirl who ran this 24-hour porridge house, and I'm going to be back in 2 weeks. And so after, my mother came back home, being that she was a boss, she probably, for the 2 years that I was in Bupyeong, she parked me at these orphanages because she probably knew when the raids were coming.
Oh, I see.
And she probably knew that she was going to be arrested and I needed to be taken care of.
Right.
So these other orphanages that I went to, these were orphanages just with Korean kids, not mixed Amerasian kids, but Korean kids. And I remember when I was dropped off there, because I was still the nigga in these orphanages, and they would call me Gumdingy. But I was just like, well, you motherfuckers are the orphans. I got a mother and she's coming back to pick me up. So I always kind of had the last laugh.
Right.
Because when she picked me up, she might as well rolled up in a Rolls Royce.
Right.
I'm walking like, yeah, that's my mother. I got mine. Get yours.
Right.
So that's kind of that's the context behind me being parked at these orphanages. But the last orphanage she dropped me off at was different. It was different. And the way that I write that chapter called the drop-off chapter is it was different. Her attitude was different in the morning. The cab ride out to the orphanage was quiet. And then when I got to this orphanage, I saw a bunch of mixed Korean kids, white and Korean and black and Korean. I was just like, oh shit, this is cool.
Right.
These are my people.
So you had a little bit of almost excitement too, maybe, even though you didn't really know.
Excitement for that reason, but also excitement for every time she dropped me off at an orphanage, she said that she was going to be back, and I always believed her.
Right.
So I thought I was just kind of taking a little break and a holiday anyway. So, I was always kind of excited because it was a little change of pace for me.
I see.
But and it was different because I remember when she dropped me off, she asked me, she goes, Milton, I'm gonna be back tomorrow to check up on you. Can I bring you something? Can I bring you a gift? And I was just like, okay. Well, she's never asked me that. I was like, well, I want a train set because I used to love trains. And she was like, okay. And then sure enough, she came the next day, and I'm, she's hugging me. I'm looking back in the cab, and I'm not seeing the train set. So I was kind of disappointed, but then that's when she told me to, she said that it might be a while before she sees me again, and she told me to be strong, and that was the last day I saw her. Yeah. So, but fortunately for me, when I did get dropped off, I almost got into a fight with this little kid named Joseph because he was riding this really big bicycle, and I always had a thing for for bicycles too, and I had never been to school. I was 8 years old, but I had never been to school, but Joseph was in school, and the next day he went off to school, and I got on that bicycle, never got off. And then when the Washingtons came to pick him up, because I didn't know it at the time, but they had been adopting Joseph for almost a year because he had a very complicated adoption because he had a very complicated life up to that point. They came to pick him up, and then that's when I jumped in the car and locked the doors and wouldn't get out. And then that's when the Washingtons said that let's try to take them both home to see which one would fit better with the family. And then after a week with the family, they were getting ready to bring us back to the orphanage to make their final decisions on everything. But then I ran away, and they had to spend the entire day. They had the military police looking for me, and then they found me asleep inside of in a playground inside of like a barrel in a tube. And then at that time, Gwen Washington was like, Milton, we knew then that we had to take both of you guys.
Right. So did you understand that by them taking you, that meant you were probably going to be a part of a new family and may not see your mom? At that age, did you understand that was a possibility?
I think I did. But part of, part of we'll put it this way, that story of me, running into the car, locking all the doors, I didn't remember that until my adoptive mother told me that. Right. And then when those memories came back, I think there's always been this kind of persistent question of, well, Milton, why did you do that? If you're kind of used to your mother always coming back, why would you go run off to another family? And the short answer is really, I don't really know. But what I do know is even back in the village, my mother used to tell me about, because I used to ask about my father, and she used to tell me about him being in America. I'm in a third world country. I'm a third world kid. And, I was like, so I was enamored with this idea of going to this beautiful place, like I said, these gold cities that floated in the clouds with flying cars. Right. And if my father was going to be there, holy shit, I definitely had to go. Right. And then once from the village, then going to Dongdachun, and then coming to Bupyeong, and then seeing black soldiers for the first time, and like I said, deeply connecting with them and identifying with them. I fell in love with blackness. Right. And then after 2 years, and then being dropped off, at several orphanages, and then being dropped off at Father Keen's house, the St. Vincent's Orphanage for Amerasians. And this car, this big black Ford LTD pulls up, and the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, first black woman I had ever seen, she was the most beautiful person that I ever seen. And that's Gwen Washington. And then out of the driver's side comes out, one of the blackest men that I've ever seen, and he looked like the baddest motherfucker ever. And that was Don Washington, and I was like, holy shit, I gotta, they're my ticket. Right. It's like my life is perfect.
Right.
So yeah, I think it was just I had these ideas of getting to America, and I knew that, I could, by being adopted, by having a family want me. But then for me to, because if you ask Gwen Washington, my mother now, why did you guys adopt Milton? She'll tell you all day long, we didn't adopt him. He adopted us. So yeah, it kind of worked.
Right.
Part of the reason why I call Slickyboy is a term basically that means thief in Korea, and I part of the reason why I call myself a Slickyboy besides the fact that that's what I was on the streets of South Korea, is because I say I stole my way into the Washington family.
Is a Slickyboy something that they would say in English, or is there Korean?
Slickyboy is a term that Korean nationals would use, say in English, as well as U.S. soldiers. And if you're a soldier getting ready to do a tour in South Korea, they're going to brief you on the countries, kind of the do's and the don'ts, where you can go, where you can't go, what you can say, what you can't say, who you can, hang out with, who you can't. But one of those things that they're going to tell you is kind of keep your eyes and your ears out for Slickyboys, little thieves that run around the streets that will steal whatever you have because it's American and it's valuable in the black market.
That's interesting. So what's your dynamic once you transfer over into the Washington's world? I know you said that you still lingered in Korea for another year or so while you and Joseph sort of learned English and became acclimated as part of the family. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
And you were with your other siblings, or at least the adopted siblings, during that time, socializing?
Yep.
So what was your dynamic after that? Do you feel, when you think of them, do you think of them as adopted family, or do you think of them as just your family after all these years? And I guess it's kind of both. It's hard not to go, they're not. Well, first of all, culturally, there are a lot of similarities, because I was kind of raised in this family. But socially, we're very, very different. First of all, the way that who's part of the biological family is it's Don, Donna, Darren, and Dwayne, all the D's. Right. And they're, as far as black folks are concerned, they're different, because they're different, because they're military. When you have these kind of, different kind of family cultures, military makes, that's, if you're a military brat, that kind of makes you different. Right. Right. If you're a white person, but you're white military, you're different. Right. So not only that, but, they're military, but like every one of them is like extremely smart, top, and 99 percentile on the SAT. And Don Northwestern, Donna Northwestern, Dwayne Northwestern, Darren Stanford MBA. So that's different. You know what I mean? It's rare that you got that kind of lineage, that kind of pedigree in just, like one generation. Yeah. So, in many ways, my heart says, those are my brothers and sisters, period. But, it's hard not to go, but it's not like they were my brothers and sisters all the time, because I had so much of a life before I met them, But right after I got adopted, I had this zeal and enthusiasm to be a part of a family. And then also to be in America. So, it was kind of this kind of Jekyll and Hyde situation for me, because during my kind of waking moments, I was just like getting into it, getting after it. And where we lived in this little housing community that we lived, it was just this great culture of, acceptance. Like, even though I was different, it wasn't a thing, because these were all military families. Right. Yeah, military families were always mixed when we were growing up, too. Like, your little tribe was all half black, half white, half Asian, half white, whatever. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like I said, then even the white folks, even the white kids, there were some cool ass white kids. Everybody was just inherently tolerant, and it was never a thing to be different in this way.
It was more like because they were military families, there was something special about everybody that was a military, like growing up, because we lived on the base sometimes too. Like the civilians were those other people, but we are all, exactly.
Like all of a sudden, I was different, but I'm like, oh, now I'm in, because now different is kind of the majority here. So it was fantastic. And, Joseph and I, we kind of quickly got acclimated. There were some bumps in the road, but, and I talk about some of that stuff in some of the chapters, but, we quickly got acclimated. And, not only that, but, Joseph and I, we started to we were able to kind of exert our kind of, physical prowess and athletic prowess. Joe was a pitcher, and me, I played t-ball and soccer, did all kind of, I was just getting in there. It was like a new lease on life. And me and Joe, we were just getting in there.
Did you feel that the two of you had more of a bond than with the other siblings just because you had a somewhat shared experience, both being Black Korean?
Maybe so, but a lot of that was probably just kind of a function of language in the beginning, because that's all we spoke was Korean, and and we quickly found that we had kind of parallel lives. We had basically the same experience, with a couple of major exceptions, but we were so busy kind of living this 360 change of a life.
Right.
We didn't even have we didn't even have time. It's like, all of a sudden, from being, completely outsiders and isolated and orphans, all of a sudden we had a family, kind of three hots in a cot. We were eating all day, and, my mother was making birthday cakes for us, and we had this massive community, and, we were a step closer to America, and we started, picking up the language. It was a blur of just living, and so we didn't really kind of, me and Joe, we were tight, but he was 2 years older than me. And, so, I actually became, my closest closest sibling is my brother Darren, and he's just a year older than me. Kind of really, I'm kind of older than him, but he's the Stanford MBA guy. And
in terms of the age correction, you're older, but you were socialized younger.
Yeah, but then, by the time we were in high school, because, I had this kind of always outward personality, but Darren was kind of the quiet, kind of the nerd guy, like my other brothers and sisters. I was the one that had all the social capital, so a lot of his friends were kind of my friends, and that sort of thing. So in some ways I was kind of the older brother, but we did that for about a year and a half in Korea, and then we we were on an airplane, big old 747, and our whole family. And then, we landed in California, but we ended up driving out to Lawton, Oklahoma, which is where Fort Sill Army Base was. And that was my first place living in the U.S. And life was fantastic. Have you ever seen the show on Netflix called Stranger Things? Yeah, the three kids or the four kids running around on their bikes, and got walkie-talkies and all that. That was like my life. And we played Dungeons and Dragons. My older brother Don, he was dungeon master, and I remember learning so much vocabulary through D&D.
That's
we were we played D&Ds, but we weren't weirdos. You know what I mean? We weren't running off in the caves with swords and committing suicide and shit. You know what I mean? That wasn't us. Because we were too normal for that. But we were kind of nerds, and thank God that I got adopted into a family packed full of nerds, because, like I said, I didn't start school until I was 9 years old. And when I did, it was in a new language, new culture, new everything. So I have a lot of baggage behind learning. The learning culture of our family was just enough to offset a lot of that allowed me to still learn in my way and understand kind of how I learn, and and still find those pathways to getting information and being able to use it.
Yeah.
And because most of the people who know me now, they go, geez, Milt's a smart guy and this and that, and maybe I am a smart guy, but I almost shouldn't be given my history.
Well, it's probably not that you shouldn't be smart, but maybe the education would have been different. You probably, had a lot of that intelligence sort of inherently in you, and you just had to get the opportunity to learn.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's semantics. Yes.
Yeah,
so when I say I shouldn't be, but I'm just saying
you shouldn't be as well off or whatever.
Yeah. The odds are stacked against me,
right.
In this situation for me to be, someone to be able to realize my intellect.
Right. Yeah.
But like I said, I owe that. And that's one of the reasons why I love my parents so much is because one of the things that, they just did because these are just the kind of people that they were. They just established a culture of learning in our house that, like I said, produced 4 kids, 3 Northwestern and Stanford MBA. Mm-hmm. That's incredible.
Right. Yeah. You can hear it in your voice too when you do talk about them, even if it's briefly, like the admiration that you have both for Gwen and Don. You said is your father's name.
Yep.
What was that feeling like, getting used to having a father in your life for the first time? Like how?
Oh my God! Well, that is a major thread all throughout,
mm-hmm.
and we're gonna, and it probably is another show, but I'll tell you, I'll give you a high overview of it. When I saw him getting out that Ford LTD, he was to me the epitome of a man and a black man. And he's lived up to that, my expectations, and exceeded it. Now, him and I, personally, because he's such a kind of a, he's a bit of a hard ass. Sure. because he kind of had to be, military, and he came from 13 kids, and he's got his own thing, and I was that kid in the house that was running around getting into trouble, so we kind of had a culture clash between him and I, and the family and I, but to anyone who knows me and thinks kind of highly of me because of the things that I stand for and the things that I do and my capabilities, it is because of my father and me modeling myself after my father. And I'll tell you this, and this is dead honesty, I don't stack up at all compared to my old man. I don't. Thank God I got some strengths in some other areas, but he's an extremely formidable person and human being. And thank goodness he was the kind of hard ass he was, because otherwise, with me and my tendencies that I had after being adopted and growing up, I'd have been the kind of guy that I would have got locked up into too much trouble. If I didn't have him around, he put the brakes on me, the way that I needed it.
Right.
I not only do I love my old man, but I absolutely admire him. But then at the same time, I can hate his guts. And chances are, it means that if that's the case, it means that he was an effective father.
Right. And obviously had such a huge capacity of love to bring you and another child into his already established family and try to give you a crack at life.
Well, that decision was really more my mother. It was less him, because he was actually against the idea of adopting a kid, and my mother just worked him. So that's just kind of how that worked.
Let's try to get a little bit of a similar type of thing in terms of Gwen, because then now you have the dynamic of, this is the first black woman you've ever seen. You said she's the most beautiful woman you've ever seen. She's also, obviously a big point of the caregiving that you had for the rest of your childhood, but sharing the spot of a mother, since you already have one that you knew up until then. What was that relationship like, or that transition like for you?
Well, so first of all, let me tell you this. Both my adopted mother and father, one of the major themes in my whole story and my existence is I might be one of the luckiest motherfuckers that you might have ever met. I am. I haven't hit lotto yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if I do in my life. And I say that is because my mother in Korea was this kind of really kind of perfect balance between, disciplinarian and nurturer. She did it both. She was my mother and my father at the same time. And then I get adopted into a family that I end up getting a continuation of my mother in these two people. My mother was, my mother, Gwen, when I used to get in trouble, my old man used to beat my ass on a regular. But then afterwards, I always used to kind of crawl into my mother's lap and or just cry on her shoulder, and she'll tell me about, the things that I needed to hear, about, how they love me and how they care about me, and they got to do this because, all the explaining and the nurturing that, a kid like me needed, which is exactly what my mother in Korea used to do. Yeah, she used to beat my ass with a broomstick, but she always used to let me kind of crawl into her lap, and she would explain life to me, So, yeah, and not only that, but it's, one of the things that, that I really love about my mother is she is one of the most empathetic people I've ever experienced ever. And that's a great thing to kind of learn and embrace. Right. From somebody. And she's also one of the most creative people I know. And I say that because I think creativity in my life, me kind of living my life as an artist, I think is one of the most kind of, it's one of the single most attributes that makes my life as good as it is. Because I feel that, I've always had I think anyone who's ever been through some shit has a deep desire and a need to express. And, kind of one of my things that I'll tell anybody is, hey, express yourself. Whatever that expression may be. It may be, the style that that you exhibit in your fashion. It may be, you might be a painter, you might be a photographer, you might be a writer. But whatever it is, especially a person of color, chances are you have a deep need to express. Right. Do it. It makes your life better. And if you're halfway good, chances are you can make other people's life better. Right. So, and that's one of the things that I got exposed to early from my mother, because she used to make these cakes, and she was always this wonderful kind of chef, and she used to just create just on a whim, just boom. And I was just like, well, that's pretty cool. I'd like to have that power. Yeah. And that's, like I said, that might be like number one in my life in terms of, me being empathetic person and me being the artist that I am. And I really do. I attribute, some of that I think I had in me, but my mother almost gave me permission to fully unleash all that.
That's nice. Nice to have had that opportunity or experience just from what could have potentially been a really dark path. Yeah. After getting dropped off at that orphanage.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I'm, excuse my French, but I'm a lucky motherfucker.
No, yeah, absolutely. I love it. All right. So we're crossing over really close into the 90-minute mark, but I do still want to talk about, your business and what drives you for the kind of creating that you do. You're obviously very active because not only with your own business, you're also doing speaking engagements and things like that. Right. So let's talk a little bit about that and sort of the Black Korean community you've developed over the time that you've been working on the memoir and everything like that.
Yeah, well, the Black Korean community thing is just, kind of, I guess, thank God for social media and all that, because we've just kind of coalesced around each other, and I do, in many ways, I just feel like they're my family in many ways, right? Because of the shared experience. So and I have some plans. I plan on being kind of rich and influential, and one of the reasons that kind of drives me because I want to do something for us. Because I think that being different, being mixed, being Black, being all these other things, you kind of start off, you're starting off with a disadvantage at the starting line. And I just said that I'm going to get really good at aspects of business, and I'm going to be too compelling for someone to tell me no. maybe this is some of both my Black side and my Korean side. I've always kind of been an entrepreneur. I've always had lots of ideas, and I think good enough ideas that I'm capable of making some serious money. If I put my mind to anything, because my ideas are sound. So the kind of the current thing that I got is something that's called Slickyboy Studios, and in its current state, what Slickyboy Studios is several things. It is a small business growth consulting service. So that's me kind of developing growth strategies, business sales and marketing and brand strategies for small businesses. I have, my client can be, kind of startups or existing small brands or nonprofits or other small businesses. Okay. It's kind of agnostic, but they're mature enough in which they can pay for services, because I don't really do too much that, right. I'm kind of over that. But then there's also what's called a visual development component to my business, which is, after I establish, a sales strategy or marketing strategy, and I'm saying that, you ought to do this on social media to get more customers, that might require you to adjust your branding. Mm-hmm. It might require you to set up social media accounts and then start to execute on those social media accounts. But then the business owner goes, I don't really have time to do all that. So what I do is I go out and find the resources to do that sort of stuff, to do the work. So like I got a project going on right now, doing exactly what I just said. I also have a project with a nonprofit that we're building a website and a database. I don't do any of that work, but I just manage the project and I manage the resource. So the business owner or the executive director in that situation, they can kind of, be hands off and make that happen. Right. So that's the business now. And I also do a lot of photography. I also do a lot of career coaching and sales coaching and help people kind of navigate issues through life. But then once the book drops or on the run up to the book, there's going to be kind of a publishing component, because I got a few more books in me, I know. There's going to be a content development component, which is me creating a lot of video content and beyond that kind of supports the book and the brand. And there are going to be several other kind of factors that it's, public speaking and, being that I've been in sales for so long, I think that once my profile kind of raises, I think I can get a keynote address at national sales meetings for companies X, Y, and Z. So it's going to pivot, and it's going to pivot to, services all point to generating more sales for the book. So I'm at, first of all, it's slickyboystudios.com. That's SLICKYBOY studios with an S.com. That's my website. Social media, on Facebook, there's Milton Washington as well as Slickyboy Memoir. And if you really want to keep track of when the book drops, go definitely to the Slickyboy Memoir fan page. And then on Instagram, I'm at both Slickyboy Studios and Slickyboy Memoir. And, I'm on Twitter, but I don't really use Twitter much. And, whatever other social media platforms out there. I almost kind of hate social media. I kind of do it because I got to. But, that's where I am.
All right. I follow the Slickyboy Memoir on Facebook. I found that the other day. And I will also share those types of things on our websites as well. We also have the Militantly Mixed podcast page on Facebook as well. So I'll put a little thing on that for you. But I think we can go ahead and wrap here. And then let's just chat in a couple days too and see what other things you got going on. So
definitely. I really appreciate. I think you're a great interviewer.
Thanks. I'm still trying to get into my flow of it, but I think I'll get there.
You're there to me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So thanks for the opportunity and thanks for doing this. Okay.
Thank you for participating. I appreciate it. I'm really excited that we connected, because I was looking for that Black Asian connection that I just haven't been able to find. I've found a lot of the hafus that are on the white side and things like that, but this has been great. I'm so glad that we got a chance to meet. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much.
Militantly Mixed is a Main Hustle Media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Sharmane Johnson. Music is by David Bogan, The One. And if you like what you heard on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes and wherever you find your podcasts. Main Hustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.